Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you. And today we're going to be taking a look at the GTX1080 Ti because Nvidia have finally launched it. There's a lot of, we could sit here and talk for hours, and to be fair we'd need some beers and packets of crisps and pork scratchings and stuff if we were going to go over it. But it does seem that they've waited to launch this little puppy. But what happened, I mean, you can get one of these, you could pre-order it on the Nvidia shop. We do know the aftermarket one's going to come later on, but you can get this for $699. So we'll get the price out there. But what they did in a bit of a masterstroke is they actually then decreased the price of the 1080 and the other models down as well. So you can pick a 1080 up now for like 500 quid there or thereabouts. And to be fair, I wasn't expecting that. I was genuinely expecting this to come in between the price of the Titan X and the 1080, and the 1080 stay at the same price. So for them to slide this in at basically, let's face it, the sort of price that you can get an aftermarket 1080 for, because you know you can $699. I've genuinely known aftermarket 1080s go $749 and $799, especially just after Brexit. We'll talk about price a little more at the end. Because the fact that you can get this for $699 and £699, but one of the things that you Brits that are moaning about exchange rates do need to remember is that when something like this comes into our country, it instantly gets slapped with 20% VAT, and that's without the fact that it has to get shipped over and all that sort of stuff as well. So you do need to keep that in mind. The fact that the dollar and the pound price at the moment matches is actually quite a good thing, because there was half a chance that this could have actually ended up costing more in pounds than it did in dollars. But we'll save that for later on in the conclusion. But anyway, you've essentially got I'm not even a stripped down. This is basically a proper gaming Titan X Pascal. But again, we're kind of talking about conclusion stuff. But if we were to look at the specs, we've made this little graph just so that you can get your head around it. So you've got the Titan X on the far left. That is the Titan XP. It is the Titan X Pascal, although it does say Pascal underneath. So the things that we can go through and we can see that match with the Titan X and the 1080 Ti is the CUDA core count. You can see is exactly the same. The ROPs are down a little bit. One of the weird things is the VRAM capacity is the VRAM capacity is down by 1 GB, but it's the memory bus size that has dropped. So we've gone down from 384-bit to 352-bit, but because the speed has gone up by 100 megahertz, and you can see the memory clock's gone from 10,008 up to 11,008. What that does mean is the actual gigabits a second has gone up. So whereas the bandwidth on the Titan X was 480 gigabits a second, on the 1080 Ti it's actually 484. So that's all really good as well. So you know, but also we've only got 11 gigabytes of memory. There's 11 individual gigabyte stacks on there. They do talk about a lot of stuff with, you know, that you get in with the Nvidia cards now. There's obviously Ansel, that's amazing. You can take pictures, basically take a screenshot and then move around in like a proper 3D arena and zoom in on things and catch details that you never normally would have been able to have done. But they've also introduced something called Turf FX, and we did have a look at this in Wildlands. And we tested that on a range of cards, as I'll show you a little bit later on. And the Turf FX on, you know, to actually turn it on, only had about 2 frames per second difference. So it's gone to the old days of like the GameWorks stuff where you enable it and you know, then nothing runs anymore. It runs terribly. This was kind of nice, although you kind of need to be looking at your feet or in the rear view mirror of a car or something like that to really pay attention to the fact that, you know, it doesn't just spring back up or anything. It's all kind of nice, and yeah, it's almost kind of, it does make it more not necessarily involving, but it's weird to describe the fact that it's just something that you're just going to end up not paying attention to, if that makes any sense. So it's kind of good that it doesn't make a great deal of impact, but it's something else that they've introduced. The whole Turf FX thing, though, I don't know, it instantly makes me think in a weird way that it's not Nvidia because of Tres FX, which was obviously AMD's kind of hair thing. Do you know what I mean? So I think the naming is probably going to cause a few confusions for people out there. But anyway, so the cooler underneath this is actually slightly different from the Titan X Pascal. Now, sadly, I never got a Titan X Pascal, and it's kind of missing on my shelf of, you know, magical dreams as well. But I thought it would be nice to, at very least, pop the hood on this to see if we can spot any differences between this and the normal Founders Edition 1080. Okay, so this is the Titan X with the hood popped. And they have said that they've done they've changed the vapor chamber and it's got a denser fin stack. Well, I did pull my 1080 apart as well. And when you put them side by side, they look incredibly similar. To the point I have to remember that this one goes on the 1080 because they look so similar. But, you know, on the outside, they don't look any different. Now, I've had a count, and they said a denser fin stack. Well, the 1080 has 37 fins. The 1080 Ti has 38. So there's not a great deal of difference between the two. And when you look at the vapor chamber, it doesn't appear any different. I'm not saying it's not any different, I'm just saying that aesthetically it doesn't look any different. One thing that we can see from here though is the fact that the die size is quite clearly different. You can tell that's the 1080 because it's got a smaller die. Look at the size of the 102. Just look at it in reference to the silver border. I mean, that one hasn't got a silver border, but you get what I'm saying. The hole in the middle is the same. It's clearly bigger. That's a good use of the English language, that is. Okay, so there is our naked 1080 Ti. Now, it's kind of strange because on the mock-up diagrams that I saw, had 4 memory slots down here and then only 3 at the top, like the renders. But you can quite clearly see that there's a memory chip missing from just down that side. It's literally just not there. But if we put that up against the 1080, plain 1080 rather, I'll get my words out. Now they have added in a 7th phase on this, so that you can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chokes down the sides, and then you've got your MOSFET. So there's 7 phase power delivery on this one. And then on the 1080, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You've only got the 5. And you can see that there are several areas that are missing on the plain 1080. As on this, it's all there. But I can't help but think, now, although the PCBs are not identical by any stretch of the imagination, it does almost feel like with the 1080 PCB that it was kind of built to do a lot more in the first place. Something else that's quite, not alright, maybe not frustrating, but something that you can see, and it's the same with both. And that's, there is the connector that you could put another 8-pin here. It's a shame that they weren't mounted the other way around, so they did come out the end. You can see that there could have been one there. There's even the solder in there. It's not just left. You could bang one in there if you wanted as well. How strange. Now that's the same on both as well, if you look. Now the only real big thing that I'm seeing between the two that is different, and that is this chip here. And I'm using the camera to zoom in on it so that we can see if there's any identifying markers or anything like that, but I can't see anything other than Tron traces. But anyway, so yay, now I just have to put it back together again. Now you've seen this. Okay then, so after wasting 2 hours of my life stripping the cards down just to put them back together again, we are back here. If you were to strip the cards down, by the way, I have done a complete video on my Rush Kit channel, which I'll make pop up Now the back plate actually does attach with little screws, but those little screws go inside to other bolts. It's the same as the other cards that look like this in the range. One thing I would say is most people aren't going to have a micro socket set or micro spanners to be able to take them off, because they have got little hexes around the outside like a normal bolt. If you're going to try and take them apart, you can use some flat miniature pliers, so flat nose miniature pliers, take them apart, but go very, very careful if you do it, because there are other little tiny bits of componentry on the back of the card that one slip and you can just ping them off. So keep that in mind. If you're worried, get yourself a micro socket set. Anyway, so video on the Rush Kit channel if you want to watch me literally just take it apart so that we get down to the PCB, but you've seen it in this one anyway. The other thing is, with the stuff that we're going to talk about now, with the results and the games and all that kind of malarkey, you can go and have a look on the OC3D website. And we are starting to trickle some new games in now. Wildlands come out this week, and we've done a game review on it, so we've actually included it in this because we tested the 1080 with it as well, and we went back and tested a few other cards at the same time. So keep all those things in mind. We are upgrading. We can't obviously test everything, but we're doing our best. And the other thing to keep in mind is, because people always do bring this up, is when we do a review like this, we can't go back and test everything. The reason why our graphs are so big is because we keep them and we test everything in the same way. If I was to change the rig or something like that, I have to restart the graphs. So we can add some other games in if you like, but the graphs obviously start off small and we have to make them bigger. Right, there we go. So, trying to explain my testing methodology and all that kind of stuff. So, card itself, it's 1481 is a, sorry, it says, excuse me, 1481 as the base clock, and then it goes up to 1582. Then basically you have a thing called GPU Boost 3, and then what that does is it overclocks a little bit for you. So in actual reality, stock, when we do our thermal test, was running at nearly 1900 megahertz, so 1898 megahertz. But the thing with these cards to keep an eye on is, because people do overclock them, the overclock is obviously important, which is the peak. But you need to look at the average as well, and you can do that with GPU-Z. So the average clock on this, 1898 boost, and then 1763 was the average. Right, so that's it stock out the box. Then, if you have a little bit of a twiddle, and a twaddle, and a fiddle, and a paddle, yeah, I should just stop. Anyway, so if you mess around with it, I managed to get 100% stable, but basically it was 100% stable, but what I do so that there isn't any possibility, oh, it's got too hot, or it's done this, or it's done that, I just turn the fan up to max. So the equivalent of that's going to be like water cooling or something. You could run it at this clock with the fan on the auto mode, and it will just spin up a little bit more. But anyway, so I managed to get another 170 megahertz on the top. So what that then meant is we had 1651 as our base, and then our peak was 2050, and our average was 1988. So we had nearly 2000 megahertz as an average clock with this card. And all I did was add 10% onto the power percentage, not the voltage, but the power percentage. Added 10% onto that, and then I just worked my way up. I did actually manage to get a screenshot for 2100 megahertz as a peak, and it was there was a couple of games where you could see it wasn't entirely happy. But the other really weird thing with these is you can overclock them too much, and the scores fall on their rear end. Now, there are one with the 2050 and the 1988 for this card was 100% stable, and the clocks, the scores were still climbing. When we went beyond that point, that was when they started to drop back down again. So that's another thing that you need to keep an eye on. You can't just focus on the numbers. You actually do need to bench test them in between to see if you've pushed them too far. It's just like memory, DDR4 memory. Some boards you'll get to a limit and then the actual bandwidth starts to drop off again. So keep that in mind. If you do get one, enjoy it, overclock it, yeah, obviously have a play with it, but just make sure that you do like a 3D Mark run in between each increment. Also make sure that you do thermal tests as well. The reason why we use Unigine, we put it on 4K with 8 times AA and we just let it loop because it just goes round and round and round and round, and it's lovely. It's like a games scenario rather than like a Thermark where it stresses the nuts out of it, and some cards will even ignore the fact it's Thermark and downclock. So there's lots of little things that you basically a good reason for using Unigine. Basically, I'm looking forward to the new one. So did all that, lovely jubbly, and but the one thing that we did do is I only did a full batch of tests at stock, because quite often, more often than not, when we get cards like this, they do overclock like Billio, to the point that then later on when we review the aftermarket cards, there has been times where these are still the quick ones because they're kind of cherry picked. So we don't put the overclocked results in the graphs anymore, and we haven't done for quite some time, basically because of that. Now we did review a lot of games, and I'll flash a load up onto the screen for you so that you can have a look and stuff. But hot topic this week is Wildland. So these are the ones that we've tested. You can see that we've got the 1080 in there, the 1080 Ti, Founders, 980 Ti, blah, 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 blah. And essentially you can see that you've got the 1080 Ti at the top. But just to kind of mix it up in there as well, it's not just green cards. Got a Fury X in there, 480 Strix, 390, there's a 960 at the bottom as well. There's a good mix in that as a start graph. Obviously, when we start reviewing the other 1080 Tis that are going to come in from the vendors like MSI and Asus and EVGA, if we get one, then these will all get added into this graph. With the other gaming graphs though, the best way I can explain the way it's gone is, if you want to see them, just pause. But the best way I can explain how it's gone is that if the game supports SLI properly, then SLI cards like when we did a 1070 SLI and 1080 SLI and 980 Ti SLI, they're going to be above the 1080 Ti. But if the games aren't particularly great with SLI, which some games are getting that way now, they just don't utilise it properly, then the 980 Ti is at the top. Sorry, the 1080 Ti is at the top. Like, for argument's sake, Hitman, DirectX 12, the 1080 Ti is at the top. So is it with Ashes. But it's really when you get to the 3D marks that you actually see the proper battle. And the best way that I can put it is you've essentially got on the graph SLI, 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 and then it's 1080 Ti, overclock, 1080 Ti, stock, and then all of the rest come below it. It wasn't very often that a 1080 with an overclock managed to be a stock 1080 Ti. But with all the extra CUDA cores and stuff like that, you know, it's hardly surprising. And the other thing was, to really take notice of it, was the power draw. With the power draw, that's 392 watts for the entire system. And if you go down a little bit, you'll see that you've got the 1080 there at 341 watts. So you're looking at about 50 watts difference. And to be honest with you, this is just, to be fair, it's an absolute cracker of a card. It's kind of a 1080 plus 50%. They say 40% in the specs and stuff, and you know, across the most of it is about 40 to 50% boost. It's like you've got another half of a 1080 and you've got it in SLI, but under the hood with one card. Now, they do get warm. Our one got up to 84 degrees, but you need to remember the way that the Nvidia stuff works. And what it does is it uses that GPU boost and it mixes the best kind of boost and performance and temperatures, and they're set to run at about 85 degrees anyway. The paperwork that we got through actually said 91 degrees. So the best thing that I can say is when it's running absolutely flat taps at 80 degrees, it is incredibly quiet. I know it's only got an extra fin, and just so that you're aware, I did all of my testing and all of my thermal results before I took it apart. I've actually had to put it back together now, which is why I literally started this morning and we're mid-afternoon now. But it is very quiet. The only weird thing is when you do turn the fan up, which you're not likely to turn it up to 80 or 100% at home like I did, but you do get a bit of wind noise, which is the best way I can put it, and that's you can actually hear the air, excuse me, I do apologise, you can actually hear the air entering the card, and I've never noticed it to that extent before. So, you know, that it's a weird one. That could be not necessarily the air going in the card, but the air going over the extra fin or something. But under normal operation with a reasonable size system and it all running, you won't notice it. It's really, really quiet. So in the end, to be fair, I thought the 1080 was a quick and a great little card. This just kind of is absolutely mental. As I said in the slides before, it's the fastest increment or the biggest increment we've got from a normal card to the Ti card from Nvidia since they started doing them, and it is absolutely nuts. And to be honest with you, I genuinely expected it to cost more because I assumed that Nvidia would keep the 1080 at the 1080 prices and we would get a card that kind of placed itself in between the Titan and the 1080. And so I expected it to be at least £150 more. And then the vendor cards be even more on top of that because that's just the way it goes. So for them to have put this in at $699, dropped the 1080 price, dropped the 1070 price, it's a bit of a shock considering it is essentially Titan X Pascal kind of performance. It does also mean that the vendor cards, we're probably going to get those around the sort of price point that I would have expected the reference one to have come in at anyway. So it is an expensive card. Yes, it's not going to be for everyone, but to be honest with you, with the price decrease and the fact that they brought this down to basically 1080 territory, that is the bit from Nvidia that I was surprised about because I did just assume that they would have just gone with the expensive angle. So I'm almost, in a way, shocked that they didn't just go for more money. And at the same time, I'm tipping my cap to them for doing it. But there's some, you know, there are a lot of business reasons, and, you know, we could sit here all day and talk about cards that might be coming out in sort of like April and May, and, you know, discussing, you know, the green versus red kind of arguments and all that sort of stuff. But right now, there's two things to say, is that the 1080 Ti is a cracking card. And the other thing to say is, really, and it's probably what a lot of people are thinking about, is if you did pay that money for Titans, and now this has come out at almost half the price, I don't know. I think I would be feeling a bit sorry. Now, they do say that the Titans are for different things, and I totally get that. But the other thing to think about it is, really, we've said the exact same thing about every single one of the other TIs. We feel sorry for the people that bought the Titans because it happened before with Maxwell, and then, you know, we've got the ones on the shelf. There's always been that, oh, do you know what I mean? But at the same time, for those of you that were that little bit patient and are in the kind of market for a graphics card now that is going to, let's face it, it's the fastest single cord graphics card on the planet right now. And it's another Nvidia one, which is kind of annoying in one point, but dear God, it's just, I'm not going to go about it anymore. It's a cracking card. This is obviously, if you want the Founders Edition or the Ned Flanders Edition, then, or Flounders Edition, however you want to put it, this is going to be a cracking card for you to jump on with your water blocks, because the other thing is this supports the Titan XP water blocks. We've already seen a couple of people on the forums that have pre-ordered these and have got Titan XP water blocks. So if you want to reference one, the block's already out there. But really for me now is, if this is the reference one, I'm just looking forward to seeing what the aftermarket ones come with it, because they are a bit warmer than the 1080, so that the coolers are going to have to be upgraded a little bit, or they're just going to end up running warmer. So it is actually going to be an interesting time as a reviewer to see which way the companies decide to swing with it. But anyway, I will not take up any more of your time. I am going to love you and leave you with the 1080 Ti winning the OC3D Enthusiast Award. And yeah, if you've found this video, it's the first one of mine that you've seen. Yes, I do chat a lot, but that's because I don't script, I try and keep it natural, and I try and cover as much as I possibly can, and it's meant to be kind of almost like a two-way chat, if that makes any sense. But if it is the first video, the point was find the subscribe button, share it with your mates, all that type of thing. I would be very grateful if you did. But for now at least, this is Tiny Tom Logan with another video for you. Out. That worked.